Hello everyone and welcome back to my house. I'm Stephanie and today I want to show you how I combined this set of photos to create one super dynamic product image. As you can see, there are lots of moving parts throughout this photo which all had to be captured separately, so we're going to be utilizing compositing in Photoshop in order to bring this together all into one photo. The first thing we're going to want to do is load all of the pictures that we're going to be compositing together into a stack of layers. So to do that, come on up to File, we'll go to Scripts, and then load files into stack. This is going to give you the option to browse for your files. Okay, and then once you select them, you'll see them all listed out right here, and I'm just going to hit OK. So this process will take a few moments depending on how many files you're loading. I'm actually loading far more than I would normally do for a typical photo composite. This is, I think, somewhere around 18 files. So don't be alarmed as you hear that. It's mostly because we have so many separate drips and drizzles to composite, but we're actually gonna move through things pretty quickly. And as you can see, it's already done loading. So we have all of our files here. And so we're ready to start renaming these so we can create our composite. Now, one thing that's happened here is that Photoshop has loaded all of my images in the exact reverse order that I want them to be in. I'm not sure if there's a workaround for this, so if you're aware of one, please chime in. But I'm just gonna take a quick moment to rearrange these because I need this image here to be my base layer before we captured any of the drizzles or anything like that. So I'm just gonna take a second to do that. Now I want to go ahead and name each layer depending on what's in every individual photo, just so that I know what I'm working with and I can work a little more quickly. So I'm going to start by just turning on my base layer and turning the rest off. To do that, hold Alt or Option and click the eyeball icon of your bottom layer, and that will just shut everything else off, and then you can see we just have our nice base layer here before we've done anything. So now I'm just going to start by turning on this next layer here, and we can see that this is a syrup drizzle, so I'm going to name that accordingly. We'll just call it Drizzle 1 since we have several, and then we'll just carry on and do the same with each of the other photos. Okay, so now I've turned all of these back on as I've gone through to rename. So let's just go back to the beginning, hold Alt or Option again, and click on that eyeball icon on the bottom layer. And we're just gonna turn on one layer at a time as we paint in the areas that we wanna keep. So let's turn on our Drizzle 1 layer. And so the main thing that I would like to keep for this particular image is just this nice drizzle that we see falling onto the butter here. So for every single layer that we're going to be working on, the first thing we want to do is add a layer mask. And you can see that's going to give you a white mask to start off with. This just means that this entire photo is visible on top of your base layer. And what we want to do is actually hide this entire photo and then just paint in with a white brush the areas that we want to keep. So to do that, we need to invert our layer mask by hitting Control or Command I. And you can see that has now turned into a black mask. So with my brush tool selected and my foreground set to white, now I can just go through and paint in the areas that I want to keep. You want to make sure that the opacity of your brush is set to 100%. And then I like to paint with the hardness at or around 0. Sometimes I go a little further up depending on the area that I'm painting, but I'm just going to start with that at 0 and we can adjust that as we go if needed. So let's zoom in pretty close here, and then I'm just going to carefully paint the area that I want to keep. So you can see here, this is starting to affect the butter a little bit, and I don't want to do that. So this is where I might just go ahead and adjust the hardness so that it's a little more focused on the area where I'm making the brush strokes. And one thing to pay attention to when you're compositing is where the shadows are falling. So you can see that we have, if I paint over here, this shadow from the stream of syrup. If we're not actually painting in that stream, we want to make sure that that shadow is not visible. So just be careful where you're painting and that you're not bringing in shadows that are, kind of reflecting areas that you don't want to be part of your image. And if you accidentally paint an area that you don't want to include, you can just hit the X key on your keyboard to switch your brush from black to white or from white to black, and then just go back in and refine those areas that you don't want. So I'm just going to bring this to the edge here because I think later on there's actually going to be some syrup back here that we can bring back in to make it look nice and blended. But for now, I think that's looking really good. We'll just adjust our shadow. And then let's move on to our next layer. So this is drizzle 2. So for this area, I know that I wanted to keep this kind of drizzle falling off this other area of butter. So we're gonna do the same thing. Make sure you're on the drizzle 2 layer, add your mask, Control Command I to invert, white brush, and now we'll just paint over that area. So if at any point you're painting and you kind of forget where exactly you want to make those brush strokes, hold down your Shift key and click on the layer mask, and that will turn the mask completely off so that you can see which areas are still remaining to be painted. So as we get up to this top area of the syrup here, this is where we're going to want to be careful because I want to blend this syrup in with the first photo that we composited here. Okay, we're ready to move on to drizzle 3. Add our mask and invert. So this is the drip that we want to capture for this area. Make sure you get all of the associated shadows and reflections for the area that you're compositing. You can see this area of syrup has a nice reflection on the plate, so we just want to make sure that that's included. And you can see here, watch this little area as I hold the Shift key and turn my mask on and off. You can see I've kind of missed that area with the mask off. That looks, you know, nice. It's got a nice edge there. If I turn it back on to see where I've painted, you can see I've missed it. So we're just gonna go back into that edge. And then let's hit Control Command 0 to come back out and just see how that's looking. So if we hold Alt and click on the eyeball icon for our bottom layer, we can see where we started and where we are right now. So I'm just going to work through the waffle drizzles here, and then we'll be able to move on to the spoon area of the image. So here's what we're working with now. You can see we've got 5 or 6 really nice drizzles of syrup on there. Something that we definitely wouldn't have been able to accomplish in camera all at the same time. So that's part of the reason why there's so many photos that we're gonna be stacking together here. But typically for product photography, you may be working with a composite that has something more around the range of 3 to 6 photos. So this is just a lot, but you can see why it's worth it. So let's move on to the left scoop now. I'm gonna go ahead and turn that layer on. So now we're just gonna be painting in the hand and the spoon here. So I'm gonna add my layer mask. We'll invert that, zoom in a bit, and then with my white brush, we'll go ahead and paint that in next. All right, that's looking great. Let's move on to our ice cream base and jar. So this was kind of a personal issue that I had with the shoot. So you can see when I turn this on, we have our nice white vanilla ice cream here. I had a very low amount of this ice cream left, so I had to pull in this yellow looking vanilla, and I really didn't like the look of that. So I'm actually gonna show you guys how I composite these two together so that I can keep the top of this photo and just combine it with the bottom of this photo. So we have that nice white ice cream in the bottom there as well. But let's just start with this. So you can see we still have our placeholder peanut butter jar. Let's go ahead and swap that out first. I'm gonna add my mask and we'll just paint that jar away. So now you can really see this is a cool technique to have on hand, especially if you only have a certain amount of product on hand and you want to duplicate it. This is a really great way to do that. And I think we can also bring in our cherries here. I'm just hitting Shift again on my mask while I click to turn it off and see where everything was placed. That way we can be super accurate with where we're painting our brush strokes. So like I said, I do want to keep the white ice cream from this image, but let's just hit pause on that for now. We're gonna come back to it. Let's first get our drizzles on the ice cream. So this is the top of the ice cream with our cherry here, And then what do we have next? Our drizzles. So we really don't need to keep anything specifically from this image. I like to take a photo as soon as I scoop the ice cream just to make sure that I have a nice frozen shot of it before it melts. But in this case, I think it worked out fine. So I'm just gonna let's put a few Z's in front of this, just as a reminder that we probably don't need to worry about it. And I'm gonna work on adding our ice cream drizzle now. Now you can see we have a shadow here. This is unwanted. I don't want to see that in the image. So this is going to be a good example for you guys to see where the brush hardness comes into play when you're painting. So let's go ahead and add our mask and invert. And our ice cream reservoir here is going to move a little bit, and that's okay. I'm just trying to stay away from the other areas of the photo that have already been placed where I want them. So being careful not to paint over that cherry here. And we can hit shift on our mask at any time just to make sure things are looking okay. And actually, let's go ahead and paint over that cherry in this case, or at least get close to it. I like the lighting on the cherry from the image beneath. So if I turn this off, you can see it's nice and bright. So I'm gonna leave that as is. But on this image, you can see it gets darker just because there's now a shadow coming from the ice cream glass. It's not empty anymore. So that's just a creative decision with compositing. I'm gonna leave the lighting as is, but I'm gonna paint that shadow right up to the edge. And now what I'm going to do is do my best to avoid painting in the shadow with the understanding that some of it is going to come into play here. There are certainly things that you can do in studio to prevent this sort of thing from happening with your lighting, but just due to the nature of this photo where we have hands coming in from multiple sides, it was bound to cast a shadow from one of the sides, so this is just kind of the nature of what we're working with here. Okay, so now we're gonna zoom in real close, and we wanna take those shadow areas away. One thing that I like to do is with our layer selected here, I'm gonna grab our object selection tool and just kind of use this as an aid to help us get as close as possible to these areas that we wanna keep without painting those away. So I'm going to change this to cloud. It's gonna give you more detailed results from your select subject dropdown. And then you can see it's gonna highlight areas that it thinks you wanna select. So let's just click and start with the spoon here. And you can see that actually made a really good selection. I'm gonna hold the shift key because I wanna add to this selection. I don't wanna take it away. And I'm gonna do the same with our ice cream. And you can see it also selected our cherry stem. So this is actually looking really, really great. And I think it's gonna make our job a lot easier. So go back to your layer mask, make sure we're on the mask. And we actually want to invert this selection so that we can paint away this area of the wall. So I'm gonna hit Control-Shift-I to invert the selection, and now our wall is selected. So with the brush tool, we can come back in. We wanna use a black brush to paint this away. And now you can see the shadow is gone. Just make sure you don't get too close to other areas. But just like that, we got rid of our shadow. And if we zoom out here, now we just have that beautiful drizzle. Now let's just say, for example, you weren't using the technique where you made a selection and we had our brush here. And let's just paint a small area of that shadow back in just so I can show you guys what I mean. This is where the hardness of your brush comes in handy. If we bring this all the way down and say we want to paint our shadow away here, you can see it's kind of feathering itself into that stream of nut butter here, which is what we don't want. So if I undo, in this case, I say bring the hardness all the way up because we want to get super close to this without affecting the drizzle. And that's going to give you much more accuracy, and you're not going to have to worry about feathering into the area that you want to keep. Okay, so now it's just a matter of adding in the rest of our ice cream drizzles, and then we'll come back and fix the ice cream in the glass. So I did grab an option when I was shooting where we have the cherry on top of the sundae here. So all I'm doing here is seeing if I want to keep it. I want to see if the drizzle that we captured works out logistically with it before we commit. And let's remove this one just for now. We can always just delete this layer. I don't really think I like it. I think the stream is competing too much with the stem. So I had this layer named here as cherry option. I'm just gonna hit delete. We don't need that. So now we're ready to move on to the jar spill. So let's turn this on. And now there's another thing that I wanna show you guys that's really gonna come in handy when you're masking. So let's add our layer mask, invert. We're gonna zoom in here and let's just go ahead and roughly paint where we think this jar is. Make sure my hardness is down. Okay, so let's say we're happy with this. And this is a little exaggerated, but just to show you guys what I mean. When you're masking, you want to make sure that you're not missing any important areas of, the portion of the photo that you want to be painting in. So the best way to check against that is by changing this to black and white so you can clearly see where you've already painted. So if you come over, hover over your layer mask here, and if you hold the Alt or Option key and click, it's going to turn your photo to black and white, and now you can see, we know that the jar is laying here. So this area in black, we can see we've clearly missed. So if we just paint over this, this is just going to help ensure that you didn't miss any weird areas in the center or along the edges, and it's just going to give you more accuracy. So when I'm painting on something like this, I like to just keep switching between the two views just to make sure that I've gotten everything important. And then as you keep running that test where you're turning it to black and white, you're gonna start to see the object kind of start to reflect its true shape. And it's just gonna make more sense visually. Now let's go ahead and address our ice cream issue here where we want the two ice creams to actually match. So you can see I have my ice cream base and jar layer here. I'm gonna go ahead and make a duplicate of that by hitting Control or Command J, and you can see it then makes a copy. Let's drag that layer all the way to the top so that we can actually see the white ice cream in there. We'll need to delete our layer mask to do that. And now this is what I wanna keep. So what I'm going to do from this layer is actually make a selection of this area of the glass so I can just paste it over top of the other version where we have the drizzles running down. So I'm going to start with my object selection tool. I usually like to use this first because it makes a pretty good selection. So I'm just going to click to select our glass here. And then I know I want to remove the stem, and I don't think we're going to need this area of ice cream either. So for starters, I'm just going to hold the Alt or Option key as I circle the area that I want to remove, and let's just see how the tool performs. Pretty good job. It took this round area out. I may have to go in and manually remove the stem, but overall that's looking pretty good. Let's do the same. Again, I'm holding Alt or Option and I'm just circling the areas I don't want to remove. If you want to add, alternatively, you can just hold Shift. So this is doing pretty well. So now I'm just going to go in and refine this. I'm going to grab the lasso tool, holding Alt again, and let's just remove these little areas of pixels that got left behind. And now we'll zoom in a little bit closer, and I'm going to grab my pen tool to really refine this. So shortcut for that is P, and I'm just going to come around these edges here and make sure that nothing is left out. Okay, so as we close the shape here, I'm going to right click, go to Make Selection, and then we're going to say Add to Selection because you can see it missed this area down here. So I want to add it to the existing selection and hit OK. And you can see now that's nice and round. And then I'm going to do something similar with this area, but the pixels are going downward just a bit too far here. So I'm going to do the opposite, and I'm just going to remove it from the selection. So right click, Make Selection, Subtract. Now we've got that nice round edge. So let's do the same for up here. Let's remove our ice cream. I'm just kind of guessing here, but I'm going to assume that we don't need anything above the line here. So let's just come around, make sure we've included all the little pixels that we see. Make Selection, Subtract, OK. Now if we zoom back out, you can see for the most part we only have the glass here. And I think actually we might just want to remove all of the ice cream that's sitting on top of the glass here. Let's just start with this and see how it goes. So from this layer here, go ahead and hit Control or Command J with your selection activated. And now that's going to make a separate layer with just that selection. So we'll call this ice cream glass. And so if we turn off all of our layers now, you can just see we have our glass there, which is exactly what we want. So now we can come back in and do a little more masking just to blend this in and make it look really natural. So we no longer need this copy layer that we made. That was just so that we could make a selection of the glass with the correct ice cream in it. So I'm going to delete that. And now you can see this is our ice cream glass layer. It's turned on. It's got a super hard edge here that we don't like, but this is where we're going to be masking to match it up. So one thing I like to do, let's get a little bit closer, and I'm just going to, from this layer, reduce the opacity, and this is going to show me if things are lining up underneath. What I'm really looking at here are the edges of the glass. So if this wasn't in line with the glass, this is what would allow you to confirm that. And I think it actually looks really good. So what I'm going to do from our ice cream glass layer is, again, add a layer mask, invert it, and now I'm just going to paint the areas that I want to keep and blend it really nicely so that we can keep this top area that already looks really good. And I see we've got a cherry stem issue going on here, so we'll fix that in a second. Let's make sure our brush opacity is all the way up, at least for this portion, and I'm just going to bring this all the way down to the bottom and out to the sides. And again, this is probably a good time to do our Alt or Option and click trick on the mask so we can see which areas we're missing and just quickly get those addressed. So we've got a bit of an edge issue here that we're seeing. So let's just see what happens if I go back in with my black brush and paint that away. You can see some of that yellow ice cream is coming back in, which we don't want. So I'm actually from this layer going to hit Control or Command T to transform, and then using my arrow keys, I'm going to nudge this into place, and you can see the edges of the glass actually didn't line up now that we're nice and close. So I'm just going to go until those line up at the bottom, and I'm watching the rim, and you can even nudge them to the side a little bit until everything lines up. So now if we come back into our mask, make sure that's selected, we can paint away some of these additional areas of yellow that we don't want. And everything is going to be nice and lined up. I think overall this came together really nicely. I know that was a ton of images to composite together, but it's partially because I just chose a really complex concept. And before I let you guys go, let's find out where this cherry stem issue happened. Don't know how I missed this, but it happens. So I think this must have come in, yes, okay. So the issue is on our ice cream drizzle layer here. So I'm just gonna go to the mask, and with a white brush, actually, we're just gonna paint that away. Looks like that's still bringing in some shadow or something here. So I'm gonna create a new layer up here, call it retouch, and with my clone stamp tool, I'm just gonna stamp the background to get rid of that extra shadow. Okay, looks great. Let's bring our left side jar back in. I think that disappeared. I accidentally turned on this layer that we didn't need at some point, so that got rid of our beautiful waffles and our other jar. So that is how everything came together. There is one more layer that I did take a photo of. I wanted to rearrange the kiwi and orange that you see here. So that was just kind of a creative decision that I made. I'll probably composite that into the final photo just because I liked the positioning of this orange and kiwi a little bit better. But other than that, that covers my process for compositing a complex photo like this one. Let me know if you guys have any questions or what you thought of this tutorial. Would love to know what else you would like to see in Photoshop, and I'll see you guys in the next video.